Um, I hope everybody's doing well. Today I'm doing another Game of Thrones video, and I'm gonna just be talking about what would happen if the Blackfyres won, and maybe a little bit to their succession. I just wanted to talk about it before I chill and watch a terrible movie. Um, yeah, what if House Blackfyre won? So House Blackfyre is the bastard house of House Targaryen. Um, for more than 60 years, House Blackfyre, you know, kind of went after the Targaryen dynasty, haunted them, and there was five separate attempts that were made to place a Blackfyre on the Iron Throne, and every single one of them failed. But the first Blackfyre rebellion was different. This was not, a desperate invasion launched by exiles from across the Narrow Sea. This was an actual civil war, and thousands of men genuinely believed that Daemon Blackfyre was not a pretender, and he was, the true heir to the throne and, worthy of the throne. And they thought that he was the king that Westeros should have had. And at the Red Grass Field in 196 AC, Daemon came terrifyingly close to proving them right. So tonight or today or whatever time it is, we're going to be changing that one moment. Um, so Blood Raven's arrows fail to kill Daemon Blackfyre because Blood Raven's honestly not based at all. Like, bruh, you're honestly pretty cowardice. Um, but the Black Dragon survives the Red Grass Field, defeats the armies of King Daeron II, and marches on to King's Landing. And so, what happens after that? And sorry, my photos aren't, throughout this, you might be like, what's going on with the photos? I just threw up some photos of House Blackfyre because I need to get better at editing. Um, but what happens next? What happens to Bittersteel? What happens to Bloodraven? What happens to Duncan Egg, the Targaryen dynasty, Robert's Rebellion, and the events of like Game of Thrones itself after. But to understand how different Westeros becomes, we have to first understand why Daemon had a claim at all. Daemon was born Daemon Waters, the bastard son of King Aegon IV, the Unworthy, and Princess Dana Targaryen, meaning Daemon had Targaryen blood from both his mother and his father. And from a young age, he looked exactly like the kind of prince people wanted to follow. He was handsome, charismatic. He looked like a beast. He's about to come up on the screen. He's in 4 minutes. I don't know. He's based. And at only 12 years old, Damon won a squire's tourney. His father was, so impressed and proud of him that he personally knighted him himself. And Aegon the Fourth did something, more important. He gave Damon Blackfyre, which at the time like showed if someone was worthy of like the Iron Throne, and not necessarily maybe the Iron Throne, but just maybe the most worthy Targaryen in the house, the head of the house. Play if you play a lot of the head of the house, if you play a lot of Crusader Kings, because that is that is the greatest game of all time. But not to get off topic. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, Blackfyre was the ancestral Valyrian steel sword once carried by Aegon the Conqueror, and that gift was super important. 4 generations. Blackfyre had been associated with Targaryen kings, so when Aegon gave the sword to Daemon instead of his trueborn heir, Daeron's and some lords saw it as more than just a gift. They saw it as, they that Aegon the Fourth was sending a message, and perhaps Aegon believed Daemon was the son who should eventually rule Westeros. On his deathbed, Aegon made everything worse. He legitimized all of his bastards. Daemon Waters was now legally recognized as the son of the king, and he took a new name from the sword he carried, Daemon Blackfyre. Daeron II still inherited the Iron Throne, and by most accounts, he became an intelligent and capable king. Um, I mean, Daeron. Yeah, Daeron the Good. But parts of Westeros were still unhappy. Some hated Daeron's peace with Dorne, and others resented the growing Dornish influence at court. And then there were still whispers that Daeron wasn't Aegon's son at all. Instead, some claimed he secretly had been fathered by Aemon, the Dragon Knight, his brother. And whether that rumor was true almost didn't matter. Politically, it was super powerful, and eventually men began gathering around Daemon. And in 1906 AC, the Black Dragon finally raised their banner. Westeros went to war at the Red Grass Field, and this brings kind of everything to the moment where history, changes in this timeline. Daemon is absolutely devastating in this battle. His army smashes Lord Aaron's vanguard. Daemon personally fights Sir Gawain Corbray of the Kingsguard, and this isn't, quick duel. Daemon's, he's going all out with Blackfyre. Corbray is going all out. Two Valyrian steel swords, Lady Forlorn, and two of the greatest warriors in Westeros. Um, their hour lasts for nearly an hour, and eventually Daemon wins. He badly wounds Corbray, but instead of killing him, Daemon shows him mercy. He dismounts and orders that the wounded Kingsguard knight be removed from battlefield so he won't be trampled. It's one of the moments that tells you a lot about Daemon. It also, but it also helps kill him because while Daemon is exposed, Bloodraven and his raven's teeth have taken position at the Weeping Bridge. Arrows begin falling around the Blackfyres. Daemon's eldest son, Aegon, falls. Then Daemon himself is struck down. His second son, Aemon, picks up Blackfyre, and he's killed as well. Within moments, the king, his heir, and his second son are all dead. Bittersteel charges Bloodraven and Fury. The two half brothers fight, and Bittersteel manages to destroy one of Bloodraven's eyes, but it's too late. Baelor Baelor Breakspear arrives. Maekar holds the Loras line, and the Blackfyres are crushed between what becomes known as the Hammer and the Anvil. Um, and that's what happens in the normal timeline. That's how we see, in the 97 Kingdoms, we see Maekar and Baelor goaded, the goats. But in our timeline that I'm talking about today, Daemon sees the danger, and he kind of escapes it. Maybe one of his knights spots movement on the Weeping Ridge. Maybe Daemon doesn't remain exposed after defeating Corbray. Maybe someone raises his shield at exactly the right moment. Lucky enough. Or maybe Bloodraven's first volley simply misses the one man it absolutely had to kill. Whatever happens, Daemon somehow survives, and Bittersteel immediately realizes the arrows are coming from. He leads his men up to the Weeping Ridge while the Blackfyre army below is still intact. Bloodraven meets him, and the two great bastards fight once again. But this time, Bittersteel actually finishes the job. Bloodraven dies on the Weeping Bridge instead of just getting one eye taken out. And, that will change Bran's future. It's going to change so many, because, he's green sight. He can see the future. I'm sure that somebody else would take that, but I don't even know. I don't even think I have enough ball knowledge to. I need to acquire more ball knowledge to get into that. Um, but yeah, there's no second devastating like volley or shot to Daemon. There's no dead. He's not dead. Laying beside his own sons, and there's no sudden collapse in the Blackfyre morale. Instead, the rebels took toward the center of the battlefield, and the Black Dragon lives. And still holding the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, Blackfyre. The Blackfyre army surges forward, and Baelor Breakspear finally arrives with his reinforcements, but he does not find a shattered rebel army. He finds Daemon Blackfyre winning. Maekar's position begins collapsing. Baelor attempts to save the Loyalist army, but the hammer and the anvil never happen. Instead, Daemon forces overwhelm the remaining Loyalists. Baelor is forced to retreat. Thousands die. Still, but the fighting finally stops. A black dragon flies above the red grass field, and this leans, this has a cause and effect. With the political effect would be immediate. All across Westeros, lords who had remained neutral would suddenly discover that they had secretly believed Daemon was the rightful king, because they'd be like, yeah, no, we always knew. Kind of like a Dance of the Dragons, um, you know, and a disputed claimant looks like a traitor when he's losing, but when he's coming up winning, he looks like the future. He looks like a true claimant, and people will just be loyal to the throne sometimes. Well, not necessarily loyal to the throne, but in a future step to the throne. Um, but he defeated the royal army. Blood Raven's dead. His sons Aegon and Aemon are alive. Bittersteel's alive, and Daemon now still possesses Blackfyre. Um, this is the first time House Blackfyre's everything it needs to become an actual dynasty. Daemon marches towards King's Landing, and Daeron II has a terrible decision to make. He can remain in the capital and risk being trapped inside King's Landing, or retreat inside the strongest territorial still loyal to him, which is Dorne. That's his, you know, it's his wife. His queen's uh, Myra Martell, or Mira Martell. His sister Daenerys is married to Prince Meryn Martell, and Dorne still has every reason to hate Blackfyre movement, built partly around resentment towards Dornish influence. So Daeron abandons King's Landing, and before the end of 1906 AC, Daemon arrives. Imagine, that happening. The gates of King's Landing opening. Red Targaryen banners are torn down. Black dragons rise in their place. Daemon, rides through the streets in black and red armor, with Bittersteel beside him, looking dope, I bet. Then he enters, where he needs to be, and that same room where Aegon the Conqueror's descendants ruled Westeros for generations. Daemon climbs the steps toward the Iron Throne. Blackfyre rests across his knees, and the bastard son of Aegon the Unworthy is crowned King Daemon, the first of House Blackfyre. Um, the Blackfyre dynasty, you know, they take King's Landing, but it's not the same as controlling Westeros. Daemon's first years would probably have to be incredibly violent. The families that supported him risked everything. Now they expect rewards, land, titles, marriages, positions at court, influence over the new king. Better still, now becomes one of the most powerful men in Westeros. And I think he can become Daemon's hand in this universe, or maybe he becomes, a commander for him, destroying the remaining Targaryen resistance. And, this creates one of the massive shifts, I think, in history, because Bittersteel never goes into exile, which means the Golden Company may never exist. In the real timeline, Bittersteel watches Blackfyre loyalists scatter across Essos after Daemon's defeat, so he creates the Golden Company to keep those exiled warriors together and preserve the Blackfyre cause. But now there is no exile, Blackfyre is won, and those knights don't need to become sellswords. They become Daemon's royal army, and one of the greatest military companies in the history of Essos simply disappears from the timeline. That will have enormous consequences centuries later. I think. But the Red Dragon becomes the rebel, so the Targaryens are now flipped on their head. Dorne becomes the center of Targaryen resistance, um, and they're definitely switched. Now they're the pretenders in a way, and they're the family repeatedly crossing the narrow sea, trying to take back a kingdom that they believe that rightfully belongs to them, which it does. But if Daemon wins, the Targaryens become the Blackfyres in a way. The Red Dragon becomes a rebel banner, and uh, Daeron could establish a rival royal court in Sunspear. And Balon Breakspear, assuming he survives Redgrass, becomes the greatest military threat to Daemon's new kingdom. Maekar becomes another powerful Targaryen commander. So still, there's still, you know, always going to be a problem. Um, and instead of the second and third Blackfyre rebellions, Westeros history might remember something like the first, Targaryen restoration. Daemon also faces an incredible, difficult decision. What does he do with his surviving relatives? Does he show the same mercy he showed to Gwen Corbray as, to the rest of his family? Or does Bittersteel convince him that the Red Dragon must be completely, just taken out and murdered for, everybody's done? Um, but I don't think Daemon immediately begins executing Targaryens as he captures, and ironically, I think the mercy that he will give, because he's not that bad of a guy, is Balon Baelor breaks Baelor Breakspear is exactly the kind of man who could rally half of Westeros against him. Um, and what happens to Dorne after? Dorne becomes another huge question. Daeron the second, had finally brought peace to all seven kingdoms through marriage to Dorne. Um, but many Blackfyre supporters, believe that they resented the Dornish influence, and if Daemon takes the Iron Throne, Dor could simply refuse to recognize him. Suddenly, Westeros, might return to being six kingdoms, and Daemon could attempt an invasion, but generations of Targaryens had already learned how dangerous invading Dorne could be. So I think Daemon actually tries diplomacy. He needs stability more than revenge, because the longer Daemon survives, the stronger his new dynasty becomes. Um, his eldest son Aegon Blackfyre is still alive and becomes Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne. His twin brother Aemon becomes another royal prince, and Daemon has several younger sons. And instead of these children growing up in exile across the narrow sea, Daemon can marry them into great families of Westeros. For example, I think, maybe a Blackfyre marries a Tyrell, and, um, you know, the other marries a Lannister, and perhaps another marries into the Stormlands or the Riverlands. And within 20 to 30 years, Blackfyre blood could spread throughout the most powerful houses in Westeros if, they don't have the same exact ending as the Targaryens. Um, Bloodraven, will never reach the wall. He'll never get punished like he needed to and, sent away. Um, he never becomes the hand of the king. He never, gets sent to the Night's Watch. He, never helps out with Ares the First. Um, and he never becomes an ancient green seer. And so this means Daemon winning a battle in 1906 AC or 196 AC could eventually just change literally everything more than um, like literally just changes everything about the ending itself. Um, but yeah, I think overall that the Blackfires themselves would they would still have pretty bad problems. Um, like I think that there is still gonna be one final problem. The others don't care. Like the White Walkers, they're still gonna come no matter what. And this was where Daemon's victory becomes incredibly dangerous. Um, Bloodraven never reaches the wall. Bran's Bran Stark's journey changes. Literally everyone's journey changes a little bit. Daenerys doesn't necessarily bring dragons back into the world, or maybe somebody else does. Um, but a Blackfyre victory might actually create a more stable Westeros. It could prevent later rebellions. It could prevent the War of the Five Kings. It might prevent the Mad King. Maybe King's Landing never falls to Tywin Lannister, and maybe the realm enters the next century far more united. But when winter finally comes, Westeros might actually be way less prepared. And that's what makes this alternate history really interesting. Daemon Blackfyre winning doesn't simply change the name of the man sitting on the Iron Throne. It kind of rewrites the rest in the entire story. Bittersteel becomes a royal statesman instead of, you know, an exile. Um, the Golden Company does never, it may never exist. The Targaryens become, just a disposed dynasty. Um, and Dunk and Egg's lives are completely transformed. Summer Hall may never burn. Robert's rebellion may never happen. Jon Snow and Daenerys may never meet each other, and they may never even be born. And more than 100 years after the Red Grass Field, the Black Dragon could still be flying above the Red Keep. So, was Daemon Blackfyre really one battle away from changing everything? I think he was, because the tragedy of House Blackfyre is that their greatest opportunity came at the very beginning. Daemon had the army, he had the charisma, he had the sword, he had the heirs, and on the red grass field, he had the loyalists in serious danger. All that separated House Blackfyre from becoming the ruling dynasty of Westeros was one ridge, one company of archers, and one half brother named Bloodraven. Remove Bloodraven from that moment, and the entire history of Westeros may belong to the Black Dragon, House Blackfyre, the kings who finally bore the sword. Thank you guys. If you enjoyed that, leave a like and subscribe, please. I wanted to do this and kind of maybe a picture slideshow, maybe videos. I just don't have any videos of you know, the Blackfyres yet. You should have put um Griffin the show, but I hope you guys have a good one. Thank you. Leave a like, subscribe, and take care, y'all.